Where can you find gourmet organic coffees, a friendly hometown atmosphere, and beautiful views of Humboldt Bay and beyond? It's Has Beans Cafe, open every day at 2nd and I Street in the heart of Old Town Eureka. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. This is Charles Douglas of the Humboldt Sentinel here at the Access Humboldt Media Center in Eureka. This is episode 16 of Sentinel Interviews. And of course, as promised, we sit down with Eureka Police Chief Garr Nielsen. He's been on the job for over 4 years now, and he gets pretty deep into police work, what it takes to beat the streets here in Eureka and try to clean things up in the department as well. Of course, there were a series of officer-involved shootings a few years back. Neelson's made a number of changes in the department, including getting rid of the SWAT team, implemented the POP team to try to deal with chronic problems around Eureka, and he shares with me his philosophy on police work, the interrelation between what the police does versus what the military does, and his plans for the future for Eureka's public safety. Remember, you can always find Sentinel interviews online at youtube.com/Humboldt Sentinel. We're here on Access Humboldt Channel 12 every Thursday at 7 o'clock with replays, Sundays at 3:30, and Wednesdays at 5:30. Garr Nielsen, Chief of Police of the City of Eureka. Thanks so much for coming down to Has Beans.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, you've been on board with the EPD for over 5 years now, I believe.
No, it'll be 4 years on the 5th of this month.
Okay, so
just
4
coming
years.
up on my 4th anniversary.
Entering your 5th year then.
Entering my 5th year, yeah.
So that must be a pretty good feeling. I think Eureka has had a somewhat of a turnaround in its crime rate and in its public perception of the police department.
We certainly have had a turnaround in the public perception of the police department. The crime rate has turned around. I think that's nationwide. We've seen that, and Eureka is pretty much following the national trends. So, I don't want to take credit necessarily for that, but I think the fact that there certainly is a much improved community relationship than we had when I began my tenure as chief is really what I consider to be one of my most significant accomplishments.
And let the folks at home and on the internet tuning in, let them know who you are, what brought you into a career in law enforcement in the first place. I understand you came originally from Multnomah County to Eureka.
Correct. I actually came into law enforcement through a rather circuitous route. I graduated from Cal Berkeley and went there with the thought of becoming a teacher, and about halfway through my tenure it became clear to me that teaching jobs were going to be few and far between. And I happened to be rooming with a guy who was a police officer, and he said, this is not a bad job. It's, it's exciting, it's challenging. I really like it, and the pay's not too bad. You ought to come out and ride with me. So I went out and rode with him a couple of times and had a good time, and applied for a job. And when I graduated from college, I got hired after being turned down several places because at that time coming into the profession with a college degree was pretty unusual, and I had more than one prospective employer tell me that I was overqualified. And I don't know how you can be overqualified for being a police officer, but that was what I was told. So but I was eventually hired by the city of San Bruno and worked there for about 7 years, and then moved to Oregon and spent the majority of my law enforcement career working for Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, about 21 years up there. And during that time, I worked my way up through the ranks from a deputy sheriff to a captain, and performed in just about every operational assignment that they had. And I was, very fortunate to come along at a time when there were a lot of opportunities open for me, and I worked canines, and I worked training and narcotics and traffic and motorcycles, and really had a great experience up there, and a wide range of experience.
Now, Multnomah County, that's where Portland is. That's several 100,000 people, right?
It is. It's the county, I believe, is close to 1 million people, probably about 700,000 people. Of course, we were responsible primarily for the unincorporated areas, which is a much smaller area. But geographically, we had a large area. We had both the rivers. Portland is surrounded on north and south by the Columbia River, and east and west by the Willamette River. And so we had about 96 miles of river that we were responsible for, and a great deal of the area out in the Columbia Gorge is part of Multnomah County. So we had a pretty significant standing out there also.
So even though it's a lot more people, culturally, would you say there's quite a few similarities as far as a real basis in natural resources, timber industry, economically, and definitely a strong counterculture sort of element?
I would say the counterculture element is certainly very, there's a lot of similarities there. Economically, I don't know whether there's as much, but I think there's, as far as people's appreciation for the natural resources and the preciousness of those, and the appreciation of them certainly is shared by the constituents that that I dealt with in Multnomah County, are much like the people in Humboldt County. Yes.
So I understand you put down strong roots there. You raised a family there.
Mm-hmm.
What motivated you to want to uproot and come down here to Eureka?
Well, actually, I began looking for a chief's job probably a year or so before I was hired in Eureka, and was looking I wanted to stay on the West Coast, and preferably the northern part of the West Coast, and had a couple of opportunities in Washington, and then of course the Eureka job opened up, and Eureka was a town that I'd always had kind of a soft place for in my heart, because as a youngster growing up, we lived in the Bay Area, and we had family in Seattle, so we would travel up 101 every year, stay at the Eureka Inn, and I always had fond memories of this city. And so when the job opened up, it was obviously, I had some familiarity with the city, although I hadn't been back in a number of years. It appealed to me from my memories, growing up. And so I came down and went on a ride along and spent some time here, and felt very comfortable here, and felt like it was a good fit for me. And when I was offered the job, I was, it was obviously difficult to uproot and move, but on the other hand, it just, like I said, it felt like it was a good fit for me as a chief.
Well, you definitely have probably heard the arguments that I've heard that, well, it's the social services Eureka offers through the county or what have you that attracts them here. Do you think that's fair to say?
You know what? I think it's a combination of factors that draw a homeless population here. I think the fact that it's the county seat, this is where the services are. I think Humboldt County does have a reputation, whether it's deserved or not, for being relatively liberal in their delivery of social services. But I don't necessarily buy into the fact that that Humboldt County or Eureka has a reputation nationwide or even statewide as having open doors to to the homeless, and that's that's why they're flocking here. I just think that I think it's a combination of factors, and I don't think we really have. It's not like provide the services and they'll come. I don't buy into that concept.
Of course, that was a pretty notorious story a few years ago where some authority in San Francisco was literally buying Greyhound bus tickets.
Busing, yeah. And, I'm sure that I wouldn't be surprised if that had gone on. And in which case, that obviously, exacerbates the problem that we have here and that we're dealing with here. But I think it's more an issue of the social service systems, breaking down and not providing the degree of services that they once did, that is more responsible for it than anything else.
And if you've been following the state budget situation, the most recent $15 billion some odd round of cut back to support for rural law enforcement, is that going to kind of exacerbate the situation you're facing?
It's absolutely. I mean, it's going to have a critical impact on how we do business. I mean, number one, the realignment of the prison system is going to have a significant impact, because we are going to be faced with a number of parolees on our city streets. They are supposed to be serving their time in our local jails, which means our local jails are going to have to kick out people to accommodate parolees because the jails are full, they're overcrowded. So that ripple down effect is, there's no question but that is going to impact Eureka and Humboldt County in some very probably insidious ways. And I think that it's, we're just beginning to see the impacts of that now, but I think it's going to get much worse before it gets better, and that's going to affect law enforcement, and it's going to affect the people living in this community.
And describe that in detail. I mean, I think people are going to see longer response times for calls. They're going to see not as much enforcement of more minor traffic and
that is probably going to be a couple of the resultant factors. The unfortunate part of it is that and I sit on the board of directors for Cal Chiefs, and I know that the Attorney General is very much interested in supporting rural law enforcement, and we're making a hard push to the governor to send some of the money that's going to accompany these parolees to municipal law enforcement because of the impacts that this is going to have on us. Now, whether or not we're going to be successful in that effort is yet to be seen, but clearly, the less that these people are monitored, and the more of them that are out on the street means that it's going to increase the workload for my officers, and I don't think anybody questions that.
And I have noticed just around town there is just a slight half step up as far as traffic enforcement, parking enforcement. Not to say that the goal of that is to generate revenue, but that does tend to be an end result.
Exactly. Well, it's traffic is one of the things that people complain about more than anything else. It's right up there on the probably the top 3 complaints that we get in the city are traffic complaints, whether it's speeding, whether it's parking, whether it's running red lights, pedestrian. Those kinds of things are very common problems, and so we do try to address those as assertively as possible. But as we transition to having to deal with more serious criminal issues, then those kinds of things, obviously, which are, even though they are concerns of the citizens, they aren't as serious as far as public safety issues necessarily as some of these other things are probably going to be. And those are the crimes against people. And I was talking to one of the chiefs in the Central Valley who was telling me that they basically now have been relegated because of their economic situation to dealing only with person crimes. I mean, if you're the victim of a burglary or a car theft or something like that, you get a form in the mail and fill it out and send it back in, and that's it. And I mean, he's lost. He's had to lay off officers. He's had to lay off civilian personnel, and he's down to doing just the basics.
I heard some horror stories. Some municipality in and around San Jose area. Basically, well, we're only going to have one patrol per shift, and everyone else is going to be responding to serious calls, and that's
right.
that.
And that is happening in many communities throughout the state. We are very fortunate in that respect that we, the citizens of this community, have always placed a very high priority on public safety, and I think it's to our credit that over the past 4 years we've shown them that we are good stewards of their money, and that public safety continues to be a high priority, not only with the community, but with the council. And I think that Measure O, the passage of Measure O, was a good example of that. And so we really have not been hit as hard as many communities have been. I haven't had to lay off any officers. I really haven't had to reduce my budget to any great extent, and again, it's because we have great community and council support, and continue to have that.
I was about to mention today, April 1st, the 9% sales tax kicks into effect.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, and that's projected to bring in close to $3 million a year, which is going to have a very positive impact on the city in general, and on public safety.
Although you say you haven't had to lay off anyone this year, there were a round of budget cuts that a lot of city departments had to suffer through last budget round. Are you hoping a couple of those positions are going to be restored thanks to this increase in funding?
Well, for us, once Measure O was passed, the council did reinstate all of our frozen positions. So we are whole as far as allocated positions. Now, whether or not the other city departments are going to be the beneficiaries of being made whole again has yet to be seen and decided by the council. I think a lot of it, we're just now starting to enter the budget cycle for next year, and we'll see what what the outcomes are going to be. Again, we still up in the air at the state level are continued COPS funding, which amounts to about $100,000 a year for us. Whether or not we're going to continue to be reimbursed for our booking fees, which results in about $180,000 a year for us, and some of those things. So potentially, public safety could get hit just as a result of cutbacks in the state.
And it's looking more and more like Jerry Brown's not going to get his sales tax or other state tax extensions on the ballot.
It doesn't look like that's going to happen. I know that there are still efforts by Chesborough and a few others to try to extend the vehicle licensing fund increases, which do fund those local law enforcement programs, but whether or not they're going to be successful in that is yet to be seen. I'm in fact going down to Sacramento next week for law enforcement legislative days to put in my 2 cents as best I can as far as how important that is to us in the rural areas of California, in order for us to continue in our efforts, to be able to provide service at the levels we need to.
It does seem a little topsy-turvy that law enforcement support will get cut, but the prison guards and the huge state prison system that's been built up over the last 15 years, I'm not seeing too much cuts there.
Well, the prison guards have an incredibly strong union. I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree that they are one of the strongest unions in the state of California. And bucking up against those, that force is a formidable task. And trying to make significant changes is a difficult you know, the governor certainly has his work cut out for him, going up against those guys and the power that they have politically.
But it's fair to say we've seen a fair degree nationally, a bit of demonization of public employees, and that even includes public safety and teachers. Just to let the folks know, you know, crystal clear, you know, Eureka police officers don't retire with some ridiculously fat, you know, 120% of paycheck sort of pension, and are, you know, living the high life down in the Bahamas.
Right, but there have been some instances where people in our profession have taken advantage of the generosity of the people in this state and the willingness of the people in this state to take care of their, you know, their public servants in retirement. And you know, Bell being the most obvious example of that, but there are certainly, to a lesser degree, other places where law enforcement and other public officials have taken advantage of what really is a pretty generous retirement system. That's not to say that you know, this job is not one that doesn't take a great toll on individuals, and you know, I certainly believe that public safety professionals, after spending a career in this profession, deserve to be feel like they're going to be secure in their retirements. But on the other hand, you know, those few who take advantage of the system poison it for all of us. And you're right, and there has been a certain demonization and a blanket condemnation of many of us as a result of the indiscretions of a few people who have, you know, exploited the system. But, you know, typically a person who retires from law enforcement or public service, you know, I think the average is that they receive, you know, 50-60% of their salary, you know, as in retirement. So it's not this huge golden, you know, golden egg that many have led people to believe it is.
Now, even before this whole budget crisis that's probably going to keep going for the next few years, you came in and really did perform a little bit of shock therapy and did do some significant realignment within the police department's budget, however size it was, as far as where that money was going. A lot less overtime and, you know, more boots on the ground.
Yeah, I did. One of the things that I think was a priority of mine from day one, I mean, there was no question that I felt like I was brought here to be an agent of change. I think that the city manager hired me not wholly for that reason, but certainly that entered into the process and his decision making, and the fact that it was clear to him that there was an alienation between the community and law enforcement in Eureka. And so I took that as a charge to me to make some really significant changes and to establish or reestablish a relationship with the community that was a positive one, that was a collaborative one, that was more of a partnership than what existed at the time that I arrived. And I think we've made, you know, we've made significant gains in that area. It hasn't been without a lot of pain and difficulty at times, but I think for the most part, you know, the vast majority of the people in the organization have embraced my leadership style and have gotten on board, and you know, I think we have seen the results of that. I mean, it certainly, you know, cops are very resistant to change. And, you know, they like to have a routine. They're typically very structured. That's what they like. So one of the things that I heard early on oftentimes was, well, that's the way we've always done it. And at some point I said, you know what, I don't want to hear that again. That is an unacceptable answer. The way we've always done it may not be the way that makes the most sense for this community. So let's look at other options. Maybe it is the best way, but you know what, we're going to try some other things too. And I've never been afraid of change. I've never been afraid of taking risks when it comes to management. And I think that's really the only way that you find out whether or not things are going to work is to look at them, to evaluate them, and then try them out. And if they work, fine. If they don't, then you step back and reevaluate, and go in maybe in a different direction.
Getting to the nitty gritty, where do you think you've met the most friction as far as changes you've tried to make within the department?
I think probably I would look at it or characterize it probably as a philosophical change as far as becoming more of an agency that is concerned with treating people with dignity and respect and humanity and those kinds of things, and taking those things into consideration when we deal with people. That's not to say that every cop in Eureka, when they would encounter somebody, would pull out their stick and start whacking away. But I think there was certainly a reputation, whether it was deserved or not, that Eureka's police department was at times heavy-handed, that they, again, were disconnected from the community, really didn't believe that the community had a whole lot of reason to have any input into the organization or what was good for the community. That I don't think that there was a feeling that from the police department that there really needed to be any kind of cooperative partnership. That the attitude was, we're the police, we know our jobs, and you know what, community, this is the way it's going to be. And I think we've tried to turn that around, like I said, to be a more compassionate humanitarian organization that looks at things from maybe a different perspective and tries to do a little more cooperative problem solving in the community rather than just answering our calls, trying to take care of things by crisis management, and then moving on. And that's really the whole concept that is behind the philosophy of community policing or problem-oriented policing, is that we move away from just responding to crises and dealing with them and then moving on, and instead try to look at the underlying problems that the community identifies, and working then with the community to try to come to some kind of long-term solutions to those problems. And if we don't have a positive relationship with the community, we're never going to be able to enter into that kind of partnership that we need to be successful.
I noticed EPD really jumping into the whole new media area, new websites, online complaint forms. Just in general, it seems like there's a lot more ways to communicate with the department now.
And again, that's I'm certainly, when it comes to technology, I'm not the brightest kid on the block, but we do have people in our organization who are very, very good at that. And so I really kind of see my job as explaining to them what my vision might be, where I would like to see us go, and then having them, take us there. And that's certainly been true with our webpage. I mean, you look at our webpage 4 years ago compared to what it is now, and it's night and day. I mean, we're on Facebook now. We have an interactive Facebook webpage. We have our complaint form is online. Our complaint form is much, much easier, much more user-friendly than it used to be. When I came here, it was a 4-page, fine print kind of thing where you had to, sign under penalty of perjury that you were telling the truth, and you had to identify yourself, and you had to come down to the police department and do it in person. And it was made, very difficult for people to, to file any complaint or make any criticisms whatsoever. And the interesting thing is that in spite of the fact that we've made the process much easier and much more user-friendly, and maybe have a higher number of complaints, the actual number of sustained complaints or legitimate ones really hasn't risen that much. I mean, which tells me that, the work that the officers are actually doing out there on the street really isn't the problem. The problem was that we just weren't communicating very well with the community, and we weren't doing, I think, a very good job of public relations in the community as far as letting them know that, we're here to make this a better place for all of us, and we all have an investment in it. And I think that once we were able to kind of change that culture within the organization, it's made a huge difference. But it really hasn't changed the work that my officers do day in and day out, and that their dedication and passion for their jobs.
Well, as the saying goes, who is watching the watchers? And,
right.
I guess
right.
You're saying now the citizens have more of a role in that.
Absolutely, they do. They absolutely do. And I can tell you that every single complaint that comes in is reviewed by me, and to the degree necessary, it's dealt with, and there's some resolution to it. That resolution may be simply bringing the officer in, clarifying the situation, and then writing a letter to the complainant, explaining exactly why things were done the way they were, because more times than not, complaints result from people just not understanding why things were done the way they were. And you might sit across the street and watch something unfold, and it may look horrendous, but if you knew what was actually going on and the details and why things were being done the way they were, it makes much more sense to me.
And of course, you've had quite a turnover as far as the officer corps in your time at EPD. Do you find there's a bit of gung-ho mentality that needs to be tempered? Some of the younger officers, fresh out of police academy, in some cases fresh out of the military, that need to disambiguate what it means to be overseas in a military role versus in a community policing role here in Eureka.
I think that's probably true everywhere in the country, where we're seeing more and more veterans now coming back from combat zones and entering the civilian police ranks. And there is a kind of deprogramming that has to take place, because civilian policing is much different than military combat scenarios. And these people who have been taught to be soldiers, while they oftentimes possess characteristics that are very much pertinent and relevant to the kinds of things we do, it is, they're not operating in a combat zone. They're not at every step need to be worried about somebody, up in a tower that might take a sniper shot at them, something like that. So we do have to back out a little bit of that paranoia that gets built into them as a means of surviving in a combat zone relative to surviving in a civilian police work. So that, when we make a stop on a car for a traffic violation, we don't walk up to the car with our guns drawn, and put your gun in the side of a person's head and ask for their driver's license. Do we take precautions? Absolutely, but we try to make them a little more subtle than they would be in an area where the threat is more serious than what it is in a city where the vast majority of the people are law-abiding citizens who are not a threat to the police.
There has been a trend, actually started here in California and spread across the country, of militarization of police. Not just something criticized by your typical progressives, but even the Libertarian Cato Institute has said that the two really have to be separated, military and police. When you came to Eureka, there was a SWAT team. It was involved in some very controversial activities, including some pretty notorious shootings. And you made the tough call to disband the Eureka SWAT team.
Well, and that was not really the result of improprieties on the part of the SWAT team. It was more a function of the fact of looking at the economics, looking at the reality of what a SWAT team, the function of a SWAT team is, what the needs are of really a functioning SWAT team, and understanding that there was just really no way that Eureka could support a professional 21st century police SWAT team, given the number of employees we have. If you look around the country, most SWAT teams comprise 15 to 21 personnel. When I got here, there were 6 people on our SWAT team. Well, you can't run a SWAT team with 6 people. It's physically impossible. You could do a warrant entry of a residence maybe with 6 people, but that's about it. You can't do a barricaded hostage. You can't do a major operation with 6 people. So it was obviously clear to me that we didn't have the personnel resources, and we didn't have the monetary resource economically to support a SWAT team, nor did we have could we justify making those kinds of investments given the number of calls we had in a year for SWAT teams. So I approached the sheriff with the thought of a regional team, which is a commonplace throughout the country. There are many smaller agencies that just can't afford to have a team, but there is still that need occasionally where you do have to have specially trained people to deal with a dynamic situation. And the sheriff was kind enough to allow us to place some people on his team to bring up their capabilities and also afford us the opportunity to have at our disposal a fully functioning team should we need it. And so that was really the motivating factor. It wasn't the fact that I had people on my team who were necessarily renegades or people who I thought didn't have business being on a SWAT team. I mean, we had some very talented individuals, but I just felt like it was a huge liability problem for us, and the chances of them getting into something over their heads was just too great, with only having 6 people on the team to sustain that.
I understand that came about from an earlier proposal. At least I read in a local newspaper that Randy Mendoza, back when he was Arcata police chief before he became city manager, had proposed some sort of multi-jurisdictional team just between the municipalities, Arcata PD, Eureka PD, Fortuna PD, but that even that proposal seemed a bit much considering the small size of these communities and of those departments. And
again, the fact is, the sheriff's office already had a team, it seems to make sense to me that, in this area, probably one team is sufficient. Of course, there is the possibility that they could be involved in a protracted situation where they would have to call in reinforcements. But with CHP, the Department of Justice, both of those, the FBI, all of those entities have teams that could respond to this area within a few hours if in fact we needed to, if we got involved in a situation that was going to be a prolonged one over a period of time that would exhaust the resources that we had here. So my feeling is, and I think probably Randy shared that, was that having one good solid team here was probably sufficient, given the fact that we could get reinforcements here in a timely fashion if we needed them.
And I understand Eureka's carried on a more close in cooperative relationship with CHP the last few years. Where
we've had a fantastic relationship with CHP. I mean, we have a great relationship with all the law enforcement communities in the area, but CHP, to me, is one that's very special.
Now, one item where CHP did come in for a bit of criticism was in response to what was characterized as a critical mass bike ride that came down the 101 corridor and basically wound up in an altercation coming into Eureka, into the Target parking lot. Without getting into the details of that case, obviously any legal issues have been resolved. That was a few years ago, but there was some fallout from that, just as far as how law enforcement locally deals with protesters. These folks were on their way to a protest at the courthouse. What would you say your attitude has been, what you've tried to instill to your officers as far as how to handle public demonstrations in a way that didn't escalate tensions?
It's a fine line to walk. I certainly respect the First Amendment rights of persons to protest and to exercise their civil rights. And I think that we need to respect that as an organization. On the other hand, at some point, the balance tips towards unlawful activity, activity which really disrupts the function of a community to do, or an entity to do business. We've had a number of marches through the city streets since I've been the chief here, and our tactic has been pretty much let them march. Is it going to disrupt the traffic pattern a little bit? Yes. It's going to inconvenience some people? Yes. But in balance, really, what is the trade-off going to be? Are we going to run in and make a mass arrest on these people and cause a chaotic situation, or are we going to be willing to put up with a little bit, an hour or two of maybe difficulty of some drivers getting around? And my opinion is, we'll put up with a little bit of that in order to allow these people to exercise their civil rights. But when it comes to, property damage, criminal activity, threatening of officers, violence against officers, those kinds of things, that's where we draw the line. And I think that, it has to be a two-way street. I think the protesters need to realize that there is a line beyond which they cannot cross, and if they cross that line, then we are going to take action necessary to preserve the public peace. The recent incident at Caltrans, I think, was a perfect example of that. We were willing to let them come in to the lobby to protest, even though we didn't have to. We could have called an unlawful assembly because they were chanting and disrupting the business within the building. But we chose to be patient and to allow them to stay there to make their point peacefully until the end of business hours. The end of business hours, the building closes, people leave. Those who refused to leave at that point and decided to chain themselves to the banisters, were the ones who ended up getting arrested. The people who threw objects at the police officers were the ones who ended up being arrested. I think that there were a great number of people who were there to protest what they legitimately see as an issue relative to the Richardson's Grove project. And those people, for the most part, were very peaceful in their protest, and for the most part stayed outside with their signs and acted in a way not to disrupt business or do anything threatening. But there was also an element there that I think was there for the sole purpose of confronting and causing a confrontation with the police, because that was what was they felt was going to suit their goals. And that's really unfortunate, because it diminishes from the real issue that some people honestly believe in, and that is the Richardson Grove project. And I think that there can be a legitimate debate over that and legitimate protests over that. But unfortunately, I think those people who believe strongly in that probably got co-opted by this more militant group who were more interested in having a confrontation with the police than they were in making the point that they didn't believe that this was a good project for the environment.
Actually anticipates my next question, which was as far as the call for law enforcement independent review. You've seen groups like the Human Rights Commission, the local American Civil Liberties Union, which of course I'm a member of, and so forth, try to approach diplomatically, working with elected officials in the city and the county to come up with a system where policies can be fairly looked at, versus this cop watch group that wants a militant confrontation with the police for the sake of some quixotic Maoist rhetoric about revolution. Right.
And I think, again, I think there's some middle ground. I don't have any objection whatsoever to a citizens group that will look at policies, look at police actions, advise the police, and provide input. I don't believe that the proper role for a group like that necessarily is to review police conduct unless they are in a position of expertise which enables them to do so. And I think really where we came down on something that we could all agree on was an independent auditor who did have that level of expertise, who was a completely objective person, who could come in and look at police, maybe controversial police actions, and review them and make recommendations critically on both sides. And I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with citizens groups taking away my ability as a manager and as the lead administrator of my organization to recommend disciplinary action or to decide on disciplinary action or policies within my organization. But I'm certainly willing to be willing to accept input and constructive criticism relative to how we do business. All I expect is that it come from a position of an educated point of view.
And of course the County Board of Supervisors came to much the same conclusion. recommending the formation of the Law Enforcement Liaison Committee
Right.
to review policies, and which committee could hire or recommend the Board of Supervisors hire an independent police auditor in a case of use of force.
Right, right.
And you've indicated before that you would be more than willing with Eureka Police Department to work with that process.
Absolutely. I would completely support that. And it really, unfortunately, came down to economics, I think, at least as far as Eureka was concerned, was the fact that, to hire somebody like this required a significant investment. And at that point, we were really looking at serious economic downturn. It was the worst, probably the worst time relative to this current recession when this, topic, came to the surface, and the money just wasn't there. And I think that was really what prevented us from moving forward with that. And again, as the economy rebounds and over time, I hope that it's something that we can revisit, because I think just like in the medical profession and the legal profession, I think if we are going to raise our standards and keep our standards up, then we should be subject to scrutiny. And as a public entity and a public entity that has a very unique ability to deprive the citizens of their freedom, we especially need to be cognizant of the fact that we have a responsibility to be answerable for the actions we take, because there is no other entity within the our social structure whereby agents of the state can deprive the citizens of their freedoms, and that's a pretty significant thing.
Well, in our closing moments, looking to the future, where are you hoping to take EPD and trying to keep raising that bar as far as the service you're providing?
Well, I think that I have several things that I would like to, that are really priorities for me now. I think we've got the organization going headed in the right direction. We're working, I'm working very hard in succession planning, in trying to bring up my, my mid-level managers to be future leaders in the organization. I would like to hope that the legacy that I leave behind will be one that will continue on into the future. We are working, I'm very invested in the homeless issue, and not that I believe it's solely a police issue, because I don't, but it has a tremendous impact on us. And so we have taken the initial steps to hire somebody who is recently retired from the mental health department as a temporary employee to assist our officers as a resource in helping to get some of these people plugged into programs and treatments and places where they may be able to receive assistance that our officers may not have been aware of. And consequently, what has happened is that we have ended up spending an inordinate amount of time, just displacing people from one location to another over and over and over again, with no real strategy for a permanent solution. Now, am I going to be able, as the chief of EPD, to come up with that permanent solution? No, but I think that in my position, I can certainly help lead the way towards this community coming together, and the leaders in this community coming together to try to devise a program that will work towards a permanent solution. One of the other things that is that I'm very passionate about is our response to domestic violence in this community. And we have developed a program now where we have domestic violence advocates riding along with our officers on certain shifts and being able to concurrently go to a call with a police officer and provide assistance to victims on a real-time basis. That's a program that I would like to see extended further. And continue to reach out for some of these more problem-solving. Our POP team, is another example of the kinds of things that we're doing that we haven't had an opportunity to do before, and keep looking for new and innovative ways of dealing with these problems that have just vexed law enforcement in this community for so long, and we really haven't found solutions to. So for me, the direction, over the remainder of my tenure here will be towards, trying to lead the way, or at least be a player in developing solutions to some of these problems.
Now you say succession planning. You're not planning on leaving us anytime soon, right?
I'm not planning on leaving anytime soon, but I work at the will of the city manager, and it's up to him to decide whether or not he feels like I'm an effective chief of police. And I hope that he continues to have confidence in me, and I would like to stay here until I'm ready to retire. But again, that's his decision, and I work at his will. So.
Well, Garr Nielsen, Chief of Police, Eureka Police Department, we do want to thank you so much for coming down to Has-Been today.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.